Welcome to Side by Side, a podcast where I, Robert Kwong, take you inside conversations with artists, creatives, healers, and warriors taking the charge in their transformational story. Today's guest is Rodolfo Carrillo, a conscious leadership shaman who combines his experience in business with the wisdom found in meditation and practice. He is the creator of the SARE model, a lens for achieving leadership of the fullest potential, deep sustainable personal mastery, and organizational growth. In this conversation, we dive inside his discovery of meditation at 7 years old, his leadership work with family businesses and organizations, and his mission to raise the consciousness of humanity and thrive through a greater state of well-being. Hi, Rodolfo. It's been a while since we've connected, but thank you so much for saying yes to having a conversation with me around this type of work that we're both interested in. You're based in Costa Rica still, yes? You're in Costa Rica?
Yes. Hi, Robert, and thank you for having me and inviting me to have this conversation. And yes, I am based in Costa Rica. I was born and raised here. I have lived abroad a little bit, but land calls me back every single time. So happily here.
Yeah. So a little bit about us for listeners. You and I met in early 2020, right before the pandemic really started affecting things like travel. And so I was able to kind of experience a little bit of your work and at this retreat in Costa Rica. And that was probably a very important timing for me right before, everything was about to change. And so it's really an honor to be able to connect with you again. And maybe in general, just about life. I'm curious how things have been in Costa Rica the past few years, because personally, I don't know too much about it. And I've actually only been there once, but then life changed very quickly after that. So how are things over there?
Things are going pretty well. As I think in the rest of the world, the pandemic hit us, everything closed down. We were in lockdown for, almost a year. But then something really interesting happened, which was a lot of people from all over the world started moving here, which has changed the dynamic. I think we went from being a tourist destination where people would come for a few days and then go back home, or come for a retreat and then go back home. And then all of a sudden, people that live in cities like New York, they're like, I'm doing remote work. Why am I living during the winter in a city where I'm in lockdown, I can't go out,
right?
And it's cold, right? So I think that has been a big change for the country. A lot of expats or people doing remote work here, which is changing things here. I was going to say change the culture, but maybe not the culture, but yeah, changing the way things are developing here. We're seeing a lot of international communities develop, and that most of them are people seeking well-being and consciousness, and that is pretty nice.
Right, yeah. A lot of folks who are consciously minded really think of Costa Rica very fondly. So yes, I've noticed some of the movement that you're talking about, especially with people with at the stage about family planning, right? And it's interesting you talk about people who are consciously minded, because in your work, you are a conscious leadership shaman. Mm-hmm. So can you tell people and listeners a little bit about where that comes from and why the word shaman is meaningful to you?
That's a very interesting story. I come from the business world. That's why I always say I come from the business world. I studied business, have an MBA degree in family business and entrepreneurship. And 18 years ago, I started my own consulting firm working with family businesses. So I was very business oriented. And when I say business oriented, family business consulting is a lot about emotions and relationships and communication and creating structure and corporate governance. So it's very holistic, right? It's dealing with the family and the relationship, but it's also dealing with the business and the structuring. But then at the same time, or maybe not at the same time, when I was 7 years old, I started meditating, and because my mom got me into it. And when I was 18, I wanted to have a deeper understanding of myself, because I was suicidal. Even though I had all the tools, or not all, I had spiritual tools and I had meditation, there was still my family dynamic wasn't very healthy. I felt very lonely, and I started having this suicidal intentions. So I decided to study psychology to understand myself.
Mm-hmm.
I went into psychology at the same time that I was studying business. Had no intention of working in psychology. I had the when I came out of business school, my mindset was go into corporate, scale the corporate ladder, make it to the top, right? That was my mindset.
Mm-hmm.
But then I started consulting, and as I was doing consulting, people started asking me, how do you keep yourself sane and healthy? And how do you not take in all the emotions that you're dealing with and all the problems that you're helping families deal with? My answer was, I meditate. Right? And more than meditation, it's not only the practice of meditation, it's this whole different way of seeing life, right? And so people started asking me, can you share that with us? So I started doing it, sharing my meditation practice. I started sharing my spiritual life. And it was literally a different life. I was doing family business consulting in the morning, dressed as a consultant, as a formal consultant. And then in the evening, I would close my office, move the conference table and the chairs out of the conference room, throw cushions on the floor, and then a whole nother group would come in and we would sit down on the floor and meditate.
Mm-hmm.
And I would change clothes so I was comfortable and I could sit on the floor. It's like it was having two different lives. Time went on and people started asking me, have you ever thought about bringing these topics to the business world? And it had crossed my mind, but I had never really given any thought to it. And a person in a energy practice retreat told me, it's like, I would like to bring these topics to my team. Would you prepare something for us? I'm like, sure. And then he shows me his card and he's a VP for Procter & Gamble Latin America. I'm like, whoa. Right. So I have my
Right.
first client, which is a VP client or a leadership team for a corporation in Latin America. And I don't even have a program. Right. So I start developing this and people that in my whiteboard in my office, people start coming in, reading words like ego and mindfulness and meditation and self-awareness and all this. And they're like, oh, that's really interesting. I want to take that. So that was the beginning of merging these two paths. So why conscious leadership shaman? I made a decision 8 years ago to stop doing family business consulting and move into leadership. Why leadership? Because one of the things that I understood as I was doing consulting is that I want to create impact. I found purpose when I was working with family businesses. And purpose was at that moment facilitating situations or conditions for families not to go through what my family, because I'm fourth generation of a family business, had gone through.
Oh.
Right. So my family, my grandfather, my great grandfather had a business. So went to my grandfather. When my grandfather passed the business to my mom and her siblings, it became a mess. And the whole family was destroyed and the business disappeared. So as I was doing this family business consulting, I found purpose. And I literally told people, it's like, I don't want you to go through what I went through and my family went through.
Mm-hmm.
But then that started growing. And all of a sudden, it's like, I really want to change the world. When I say change the world, it's like, I really want to create an impact, positive impact in the world. And I realized that the family business work was really powerful because I was working with a very small crowd, which was a family, sometimes 5, 6, 8 people. And I wanted to work with whole organizations. And I recognized that leadership was essential. Right? The way the family shows up in the business creates a huge impact in the business.
Yeah.
So I moved to doing leadership. But what kind of leadership? So this was what I was learning about myself as bringing awareness within and what was going on within me was directly impacting how I was showing up for others. And I was being aware or being conscious of myself allowed me to expand my impact. So that's conscious leadership. But then all of this has a very high influence of shamanism in my life. And then when I say shamanism in my life, it's like my base philosophy, I would say, is Buddhism, but I've studied Native American wisdom, ancient wisdom. And when I say Native American, I don't mean like US or North America. I mean like all whole Americas. I studied with wisdom teachers from the North, from Mexico, from Central America, from South America.
Mm-hmm.
And that has a lot of impact. Their cosmology, the way they see life and the way they see the universe, right? So, and that has a great influence in me and and what I present to my clients. The way I present it is I translate it, right? And that's the beauty, right? And when I say the beauty is because half of my life I've spent it in the business world, I've learned to use the business acceptable terms, but I can still bring the essence and the wisdom and the beauty of Buddhism, of shamanism, of ancient wisdom, right? And so
Yeah.
that's the very long answer to why conscious leadership shaman.
Thank you for that answer. It was beautiful. And it says so much about why you care about this work. And to me, when I hear the word shaman, it's almost like you're like a guide or a translator of sorts. When you say using terms that someone could understand, but actually it is introducing a different concept from over here or a different culture. I often experience those people as a guide of sorts. So I think that name suits you so well. I'm not sure why, but I'm quite surprised that you took to spirituality at such a young age. Meaning, did you say your mom introduced it to you? But also, it seems like you took to it quite naturally then.
Yes. My mom had been studying mysticism and occultism and different philosophies, Eastern philosophies, since she was very young. And when I was 7 years old, actually, the reason why I started practicing was because I came home from school and my foot was hurting. And my mom asked what happened. I'm like, I don't know, I'm not sure. It's like I jumped from a wall because we ran to the soccer field to play soccer during recess.
Mm-hmm.
So I jumped and I hurt a little bit my foot, but at the end of the day, it was really hurting. And she was like, "Well, I'm gonna help you do a relaxation so that you can spend the night because it was swollen and it was hurting." And it was actually meditation, right? She put me in a state of meditation, a deep state of meditation. And I spent the whole night. When I woke up the next day, my foot was really swollen. I couldn't stand on it. It was really hurting.
Mm-hmm.
So they took me to the doctor. They took some x-rays and I had a fractured toe. And the doctor asks, like, when did this happen? And my mom says, like, well, he's been complaining about pain since yesterday. And it's like, there's no way a child can spend the night with a fractured toe because this hurts too much. And my mom went like, I don't know how he did it, right? But she knew, right? She knew that she had put me in this state of meditation, which I spent the night in. Basically, she understood the power that it had. And she asked me, would you like to keep learning? And I said, yes. And this is where this is the part of where the shamanism comes in, or the shaman comes in, right? And when I say shaman, a lot of people associate shamanism with plant medicine,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a very limited way of seeing shamanism, right? Shamanism is actually the bridge builder, right? That's the definition of of a shaman, as a bridge builder between the spiritual and the material.
Mm-hmm.
That's the shaman, right? And that's the concept of shamanism in Native American cultures or indigenous cultures. So that's where the shaman comes in. It's like I started remembering, right? That's the whole thing. I started remembering things and my mind was taking in all these concepts in a very easy way. Like my mom told me, it's like you got to put your mind, you got to take your mind to a blank state. So as a 11 or 12-year-old kid, I sat and started trying to put my mind in this blank state. And I came to the conclusion that was impossible because I was thinking about not thinking. I'm like, this doesn't work. So my solution was I'm gonna focus on a white wall. And that's what I started picturing, a white wall in front of me as a kid. I did not understand why I was doing it. It was just how my mind solved the problem. Years later, like now I can tell you, it's like, yes, the way to put your mind at peace is focusing on one thing. That's the solution, right? It's not thinking about not thinking. It's actually focusing on one single thing. One of the things that I found years later, or not found, experienced years later, was Tibet started calling me, right? And usually answer calls like that when I get these feelings like I have to have a conversation with this person or I have to go to this place. I had no idea why I was going to Tibet, but I understood I had to go. Never thought about Tibet in my life. Planned a trip, went there by myself.
Wow.
Towards the end of the trip, I walked into this temple and I recognized it. I had been there before, right? So there is a part of me that believes in past lives. And I think the reason why it was so easy for me as a kid to take on meditation is because I've in past lives I've meditated,
Right.
right? And it was more of a remembering than a learning.
Mm.
And that made it really easy, right? And my mom was actually really good at easing me into this, right? And guiding me in explaining things. And we mostly what we did at the beginning was guided meditations, which were fun. Right? I enjoyed them.
Well, that definitely tells you that you're a natural then, because I know some people would not say that that is fun. In fact, quite the opposite. But I love how you were like, yeah, it was so fun to imagine a white wall. Well, so taking in these spiritual concepts and things that are less tangible to most of us at such a young age must have had a profound impact. But then you also described later on, you did go through your own personal challenges, these developmental stages. And as a general question about that, I'm curious for listeners, how might they notice that they're feeling what you've described as really disconnected from the world or just really disconnected from yourself versus what is it like when you are actually connected? Like, what are some of the signs they're looking for because you've experienced both?
Right. In retrospect, I what I was experiencing at that moment was the lack of acceptance of what I was experiencing, right? And that's the thing, right? That's the disconnection. It's not really a disconnection. What it is a denial of what's going on within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
When we deny ourselves, then we feel disconnected. And I was feeling lonely. I was feeling I was not feeling heard or understood. My emotional needs were not being met.
Mm.
If you ask me, and actually I came to this point where I was suicidal, but I was getting every other day people telling me it's like, oh, you look so happy, you're always smiling,
Uh-huh.
right? And yes, I was always smiling, but it was a mask that I was putting on for myself, not for others, right? To deny the fact that I wasn't feeling well. That was my experience when I started studying psychology. I started understanding the needs that weren't being met, started understanding how to work with all of those needs. And one of the things that right now I do is if I'm sad, I'm sad. And I have a right to be sad, even if it's a stupid thing, right? Or a stupid thing between quotes, right? If it's making me sad, it's okay for me to be sad, right? Where we want to go is not deny ourselves the possibility of having emotions, is actually embracing the emotions. And at the same time, we can train our mind to reframe different concepts so that those emotions don't come up again in the future or come up less. But the acceptance of what's happening is essential for transformation to happen. And the acceptance is what leads to deep personal connection.
That was so beautiful. Thank you. So, how do you think this spiritual journey and just your early resonance with meditation and mindfulness, what do you think the impact was on your business or career?
Hmm. I would say that at the beginning of my career, I was fragmented. In the last 17, 18 years of my life, I've been in a process of integration, right? I would love to say I'm there, but I still notice different things. Like, for example, this is the first time I've done several podcast interviews. So this is the first time I actually talk about my belief in past lives and my experience in Tibet, right? So
Yeah.
it's every single day is an opportunity for me to just acknowledge what's there, right? And not try to separate. So at the beginning of my career, I was very disintegrated. I had the business persona, which was the one that did the corporate job and had to do good and was to a certain extent ruthless, right? And I've never been a an aggressive person, but I was like on a mission, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the mission was priority. And then I started working with family businesses, and that started bringing in that part of I care. Right? And I was like, and it was a surprise. I'd never heard about the concept of purpose in business, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, this makes sense. This makes me feel happy. And for the first time in my life, about the second or third year, I was doing, I had my own business. I was doing family businesses. I was driving home and I had this experience of pure and profound happiness. And I was like, wow, it's like I feel happy. And I had this problem and this problem and this problem. And this is my mind at that moment. It's like, but I have all these problems, but I feel happy. And it was like, wow, that was the first time in my life that I truly felt happy. Right. And it was amazing. Right. And then when people started asking me about sharing my spiritual practice, that was a new and at first and a new thing for me. When my mom taught me meditation, she told me, don't share this with anyone because people are going to think you're crazy. This was Costa Rica in the 80s, right? And Costa Rica was a very Catholic country, right? And it was very close,
Yes.
right? So
Right.
right now it's like you talk about meditation and yoga, and it's like everywhere in the country. It's like you see all these different things going on, right? But in the 80s, this was a very Catholic country, right? Easter was like you wouldn't go to the beach on Easter because it was a sin to go into the sea in during Easter, right? That was the country I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't sharing. And when people started sharing, it was like I was doing it in secret. And when I say in secret, I was doing it out during the weekends. I was doing it at night. I was never talking about this with my business clients, right? And actually, when I started moving into leadership, my family business clients and the people that had supported me in the family business consulting process or work, they actually thought I had gone crazy. Right? I was like, this guy has a very successful career in family business. Why is he doing this crazy stuff about meditation and business? Right? He's nuts. Right? And I was giving talks about compassion in business, and my clients trusted me a lot. And they would come to my talks, but then I could see it in their faces like they didn't get it. So I started going through this process of integration of I do have a spiritual life, and that is what actually allows me to show up in business in a different way. That is actually what allows me to be a better leader for my clients, and to guide my clients from love, right? Love being a prohibited word in business up until very recently, and it's still a little bit frowned upon, but it was a process of integration. So yeah, so that's been a very interesting journey, personal journey, right? And that has ended up reflecting on the business side.
And one of your offerings that you have is the SARE model. When did that come about? And could you give a little introduction to this model that you work with pretty closely?
Yes. So in this path of integration on the spiritual side, on my personal work, I came up with these 7 aspects of ourselves that it is really important to acknowledge and address. And when I say address, it's like look at them and work with them, right? So that we can create an integral well-being, right? Or a holistic well-being in ourselves. So the 7 aspects are our physical body. We need to take care of our body. If our body is not feeling well, we're not going to be well, right? Our emotions, learn to handle our emotions, to regulate our emotions, and to embrace our emotions. Then our belief system, right? Our belief system is the way we interpret the world. And if we think the world is an unsafe place, if we think the world is a horrible place, then that's how we wake up in the morning. That's how we go out into life, right? So we're always going to be suffering.
Hmm.
Then our intellect, right? The way we analyze and process things. And our intellect is the one that creates goals in our life, right? So it's like, I want this. And then the moment that I say I want this, I create a gap in my life that creates motivation. So I go for it. But if I'm always creating these huge goals for myself, then I'm never satisfied, right? So learning to set goals, but come back to the present moment and be satisfied with where you are, but also wanting to move forward is dynamic balance that we need to play with, right? Then the mind, right? Learning to deal with the stories that our mind tells, with the time in which our mind is working, future, past, present moment. Then the ego, the way we see ourselves and we acknowledge ourselves, right? The self-image, right? What do I think about myself? What is myself? How do I value myself? Those are the six aspects. And the seventh aspect is acknowledging that we are none of us. Those are all part of us, but we are the observer. We are the witness to all of this. We are consciousness. And as consciousness, we can see all this dynamic playing out and we can intervene and we can say, it's like, oh, that belief is limiting. I'm going to change that, right? Or that story that I'm telling myself is like, not serving me. I'm going to work on that, right? That self-image, I love it. Beautiful. It's helping me potentiate myself, fuel it. That's the witness. That's consciousness. Acknowledging ourselves as different, as something separated from all this. Separate is not the perfect word. Distanced, right? Because distance allows us perspective. As I was working on this on a personal spiritual level, all of a sudden I started recognizing there had to be guiding principle, right? So there had to be some structure and level of structure that would guide my decisions amongst or on how to deal with the aspects. And that's where the five principles came in. One, purpose. When we have a why in life, our energy comes up, right? It's like, this makes sense. Like life makes sense. There's the concept of interdependence, right? The concept of interdependence. We are all connected, right? We are all part of one single system. So that leads us into compassion. We need to care for the system. And within the system is ourselves, right? So compassion, Dalai Lama says, your compassion is incomplete if it doesn't include yourself, right? So I need to care for myself. I need to care for the system. Then there's responsibility, right? We need to assume responsibility for our own lives, for our body, for our emotions, for our intellect, for our mind, for our ego, right? So we assume responsibility for ourselves, for our belief system. And then if we don't accompany responsibility with a beginner's mindset, we tend to fall into judging. Oh, I'm failing. I'm not doing things right. I am not enough, right? The beginner's mindset keeps us rolling, right? It's like, oh, I can do this better. It's like, oh, I can learn about this. Oh, I can expand on this, right? So those are the five principles. I call it the ser model because ser is a verb to be in Spanish. And the whole point of this structure is for us, and when it's done for me, it's like I apply this on myself for 10 years before I shared it with anyone. What the model does is it allows us to be whatever we want to be. And when I say whatever, it's like you can be whatever you want, right? In Buddhism, there's the concept of karma, which is not, karma is not bad. Karma is you cause something and then there's a consequence, right? There's an effect, right? It's cause and effect. Right? So it's like you can be whatever you want. You can just be aware of it. Just be aware of that about what you're causing because it's going to have an effect. Now, if you're causing from the five principles, from purpose, independence, compassion, responsibility, and beginner's mindset, then we're going to create well-being. And it's a sustainable well-being, right? And that's the basis of everything that I do right now. It's the basis of the leadership courses that I give. It's the basis of strategy when I work on businesses and strategy. It's the basis of personal transformation, right? Because it's meant to create deep and sustainable well-being.
I remember you talking about this model in Costa Rica, and just a personal story because I was reflecting on this model before this interview, and I had a breakthrough moment with the principle of interdependence. And I think I remember blurting something out. I was like, oh, that's kind of the issue that's happening with, I think I said, American politics, meaning like we don't know how to be interdependent with each other. And it kind of jump-started my brain. So that particular principle really had an effect on me. And it makes me curious when you're working with clients in the business world or, mindfulness world, what have you, are there general patterns in how people receive these things, or are there areas around beginner's mind that you notice, or common pitfalls, or things that can be tough for people to grasp?
Yes, I would separate it into two groups, right? There's the business side, and the business side I think has resistance to purpose. And
Hmm.
when I say purpose, I mean they're like, well, we need to include profit. Right? It's like, yeah, profit is very important, right? And I do quite a bit of work with nonprofit organizations, and actually one of the conversations that I have to have with them is you need to include profit, right? Because the reason why you're suffering is because you're not making money. The moment you start making money, you can do more of what you're doing, you can actually expand your impact. But on the profit side of business, right, or businesses that are for profit, there's still quite a bit of people that are afraid that if profit is not the sole focus, that they're in danger. And one of the things that they don't understand is that when we create a positive impact in those around us, people take care of us. If I show up in a loving way for you, you're gonna naturally want to take care of me, right? That is most people. There are psychopaths, right? And when I say psychopaths, I mean it in the psychological sense of the word, like people that they don't know how to relate to other people in a healthy way. Most of us are naturally inclined to compassion, naturally inclined to take care of each other, naturally inclined to be good to each other, right? That's why civilization works. You go to a stop sign, you get to a stop sign, and you stop. Right? You're not like, I don't care about others, and you just drive through, right? Most people stop. So I think purpose is one that in business there's still some resistance and fear. I would say fear about not making profit the center and or the center of the focus, right? Eventually they understand. I want to say eventually that it's a conversation. We have a conversation where like if you take care of people, people will take care of you. And then they have a ton of examples. Yes, we have this supplier that we did this, and then now they're very loyal to us. Like, yes, that's exactly it. We have this client that we did this to them, and then now they've brought us more business. Like, yes, exactly. So I would say purpose. And on the personal side, I would say that compassion is probably the one that is harder to assimilate. And on the compassion side, I would say compassion for self. We have created a society where we value sacrifice.
Mm.
So a lot of people have this idea that if I sacrifice myself for others, my worth goes up or my value goes up. Or if I don't sacrifice for others, others are not going to value me, right? So compassion for self is probably one of the ones, or is the one that I've seen more resistance to. It's like you need to take care of yourself. Oh, but my kids, yes, but if you don't take care of yourselves, your kids are not going to have a parent to take care of them. I do a lot of work with cancer patients, and that's one of the conversations that we have. It's like if you don't slow down, if you don't take a break, if you don't take care of yourself, your kids are not going to have a mom or a dad. You need to take care of yourself, right? When you're facing death, it's easier. It's easier. It's a slap in the face, right? But when we're talking about just being stressed out or burned out or just being anxious, having anxiety, it's a little bit harder, right? Because like I can deal with it, right? And sometimes you're that's exactly what you're doing. You're dealing with it.
Right.
And
Right.
that's not the way to live. You're not thriving.
In some ways, I'm surprised that the conversation in the business world is there can be a block around purpose. For some reason, my mind goes to, oh, that's what businesses talk about purpose a lot, or at least in their messaging, right? And you're saying in the personal, having compassion can be a challenge, but your model and also just your spiritual practice is kind of looking at it in a slightly different perspective, like self-compassion. Some of the most compassionate people towards others I've seen can have the opposite relationship to themselves. And you're saying that also has an impact on the way you give out compassion because we're all connected, that interdependence again. So that's really powerful. Have you noticed any differences in the way you do this work when you're, whether it's in English or Spanish? This is just more of a personal curiosity because you actually work in different languages. Is your experience of teaching or being with this type of work any different because of the language change?
I I would say not the language, the culture,
Mm,
right? So and the culture does create an impact. There's things that for a North American cultures are easier to assimilate than for a Latin American culture. Like for example, in Latin America, it's still very engraved that if you put in a lot of hours, you're a very good worker. Now that is still very engraved, right? So if you work 12, 14, 16 hours a day, it's like
mm-hmm.
you're doing good, right? You're a really hard worker. My experience with working with people in North America, it's like especially US and Canada, like we'll put Mexico and Latin America. It's like they understand. They understand that you're not supposed to. It's easier for them to understand that you're not supposed to put in 14 and 16 hours. Like, and when I say easier to understand, it's like they're still like, whoa, but I have a lot to do. I know this is wrong, but I have a lot to do, right? So it's a
Mm-hmm.
different conversation, right? For Latin Americans, it's like, no, it's like I'm doing a good work. It's like I have a lot of work. I have to like this is where my value comes in, right? This is how I show that I care. That's different, right? So cultures are different, and that's I've had the opportunity and the privilege to live in the States for a while, to live in Europe for a while. So I have a couple clients in Europe and the conversation with them is a little bit different, right? Because the European culture is much more balanced, right? It's like if you ever go to live in Europe, especially I lived in Spain, so they actually take the siesta, right? The siesta, the afternoon nap, is a real thing.
Right.
Businesses are closed for at least 2 hours in the afternoon, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's it, right? That's it. It's like you close and you go home, you have lunch, you take a nap, and then you come back, right? so, so it's a very different way of seeing life, right? So the conversation is different, right? For me, my experience has been that in European culture, responsibility is one of the things that comes up. This tendency to be more of a victim. There's nothing we can do, right? This is the way things are, which is very different from North American culture where it's like you work hard, you get it. American dream concept of like if you put in the work, if you put in the effort, if you surround yourself with smart people, you can do whatever you want,
Mm-hmm.
right? Europe is not exactly that way. So and this is just my perception with my clients. It's like if someone in Europe is listening to them, I say, well, that's might be different, but having lived in Latin America most of my life, in the States and in Europe, those are things that I notice,
Right.
right? And that I notice in my clients too.
Thank you for sharing your experience. Are you still leading groups or communities through meditation in addition to kind of more business oriented? Yeah.
Yes, on March 16th of 2020, that was the day that Costa Rica went into lockdown. It was a Monday.
Yeah.
That day, I started sharing meditation online through Zoom, Monday through Friday at 7 a.m. Costa Rica time, which right now is mountain time in the States. This past March 16th, which was 7 days ago, we actually got to 3 whole years of doing meditation in the morning.
Oh, wow.
Right. I thought I was going to do it for 2 or 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
3 years later, I'm still doing it. So every Monday through Friday, 7 a.m., there's a group. It's open to anyone, free of cost. I basically share my own practice. And I've been doing that for 3 years and it's felt really good. And it's been a personal transformation process because when I started, I was scared. I was scared that because I wanted to share my practice. Like, I don't want to guide meditation thinking about people and what they want and what they need. It's like, no, I just want to close my eyes
Right.
and do my own practice and share it. So I was afraid that when I do want to do emptiness meditation, people would be like, I don't get it. Why are we doing this? Or when we're doing compassion meditation, it's like, wow. It was a personal transformation process. And right now it's like every morning I just close my eyes. I don't even know what I want to meditate on most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Close my eyes and allow. And I tell people what I do is I just describe what I'm going through. that's what I do. It's like, so I share what I'm going through with people around me, and it's pretty nice.
Congratulations. I didn't know it had been continuous for 3 years, but that to me is a massive achievement. So, congratulations. And also, if people wanted to connect with you, either to on a business leadership level, or if they're curious about meditation, what are some of the best ways to connect with you?
Yeah, well, I'm on social media. That is a way. I would say easiest way is through my webpage. Well, if you can find me on social media, but sometimes social media is hard to find, which is my name, Rodolfo.Carrillo.
Hmm.
That's all the social media platforms except TikTok. I'm gonna say I'm not doing it because I went in one day, 3 hours later I came out. I'm like, oh my God, I just spent 3 hours in this and I didn't even notice. So I
Yes,
got scared.
yes,
I got
yes.
scared. Like literally, I got scared. I'm like, I'm not doing that.
Very fair. And I'll
So
link,
yeah.
I'll link your Instagram and things like that. So hopefully that's a little bit easier. But go on. Yeah.
Yeah, but my webpage is probably an easier way, which has a form you can complete, and it will come to my email, right, directly to my email, which is serleader.com. That is way, and you can get the book. There's an online leadership course you can do if you want to do it there. It's like a do-it-yourself thing. And yeah, it's like just reach out even if you have any kind of questions. Like I love meeting new people. I love having conversations. So more than welcome to reach out and talk to anyone and connect.
Yes. And really quickly, the book is Being Leadership: How to Thrive Using the SARE Model. And you can find that on
Yes.
Amazon, and it's pretty readily available. So if
Yes.
that is the best way of accessing your work, then please check out Rodolfo's book. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your voice and your spiritual and business journey. I just want to say this is something that deeply resonates with me as well. So thank you for being vulnerable, and I hope to be able to connect with you in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much for having me here and for what you're doing. Because sharing all this is, I think the world needs more of good news, right? Good news, good stories, and connecting with people. So thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to connect with me about the podcast or about my services, you can find me on Instagram at Robert Kwong Home, or you can find me through my coaching website at www.robertkwongcoaching.com.